The Kethrani Dominion had conquered 47 species through their ancient ritual of Vethkal, which translated roughly to blood-claiming in the common galactic tongue, and every species that had entered galactic society in the past 3,000 years had been forced to participate in this brutal tradition that the Kethrani considered sacred and necessary when a new species made first contact and wished to join the galactic community. They were required to send a single representative to face a Kethrani champion in combat, and the rules were simple enough that even primitive species could understand them. Survive 3 full solar rotations in the Arena of Thorns, and your species would be granted full membership in galactic society with all the rights and protections that entailed. Most species sent their greatest warriors, their most decorated soldiers, their deadliest killers, beings who had proven themselves in countless battles and conflicts, creatures bred and trained for violence. From the moment they could walk, most of these champions lasted only a few hours before the Kethrani hunter found them and painted the arena floor with their blood. The Kethrani were apex predators in every sense of the word, standing over 7 feet tall with bodies built for explosive violence, muscles coiled like springs beneath armored hide, claws that could slice through ship hull plating, and reflexes so fast that most species could not even perceive the strike that killed them. They had evolved on a death world where everything wanted to eat everything else, and they had risen to the top of their food chain through pure predatory excellence, becoming the most efficient killing machines their planet had ever produced. So, when humanity made first contact with the galactic community, the Kethrani Dominion was eager to see what kind of champion this new species would send, and rumors spread quickly through the viewing networks about the strange bipeds from the blue planet who called themselves Human Warlord Vethsar, Supreme Commander of the Dominion's military forces and overseer of the blood-claiming ritual, had studied the preliminary reports on humanity with great interest, noting their history of warfare, their weapons of mass destruction, their seemingly endless capacity for violence against each other and other species on their world. He expected them to send a soldier of some kind, perhaps one of their special forces operators or a decorated general, someone forged in the fires of human conflict who might provide at least some entertainment before the inevitable end. The day of the blood-claiming arrived with great ceremony, as it always did, with millions of Kethrani citizens tuning in to watch the spectacle from across the Dominion, betting pools opening on how long the human champion would survive, most wagers settling on somewhere between 2 and 6 hours. The Arena of Thorns itself was a masterpiece of engineered brutality, a vast enclosed habitat filled with razor-edged plants that could slice flesh to ribbons, pools of water that concealed venomous creatures, towering rock formations that provided cover but also countless ambush points, and atmospheric conditions carefully calibrated to favor Kethrani physiology. At the center of the viewing gallery, Warlord Vethsar sat upon his throne of bones, bones collected from the champions of 47 conquered species, each one a trophy of Kethrani superiority. The champion selected for this hunt was Krethvalum, a warrior who had ended over 200 lives in the arena, who had never failed to make a kill, who was considered the finest hunter the Dominion had produced in 3 generations. Grethamel stood at the arena entrance, his muscles rippling beneath his scarred hide, his claws extending and retracting in anticipation, his 4 eyes scanning the habitat for any sign of his prey. The human shuttle descended through the atmosphere with no fanfare, no military escort, no display of power or technology that the Kethrani had expected from a species with nuclear capabilities. The doors opened with a soft hiss of pressure equalization, and out stepped Marcus Chun. He was 53 years old, though the Kethrani had no frame of reference for human aging. With gray threading through his dark hair, and lines around his eyes that spoke of decades spent squinting into harsh sunlight. He was not particularly tall by human standards, and he was certainly not imposing by any galactic measure. Standing barely over 5.5 feet with a lean build that suggested endurance rather than strength, he wore simple clothing, practical garments designed for fieldwork rather than combat. With sturdy boots and a vest with many pockets, he carried no weapons, not a single blade, projectile launcher, or energy weapon of any kind. He simply walked down the shuttle ramp with the calm, measured gait of a man who had spent his entire adult life walking through dangerous places and had learned that sudden movements attracted attention. Warlord Vethsar stared at the human for a long moment, his translator implant confirming what his eyes were telling him. And then he began to laugh. The laughter started deep in his chest and built until it echoed through the viewing gallery, until other Kethrani joined in, until the entire arena complex rang with the sound of predatory amusement. "This is your champion?" Vethsar finally managed to say, his voice carrying across the chamber through the amplification system. "This soft creature is what humanity sends to face the blood-claiming?" Marcus looked up at the viewing gallery, his expression calm, almost curious, as if he were observing an interesting animal behavior rather than facing his own probable death. "I am Marcus Chen," he said, his voice quiet but clear. "I have worked as a wildlife conservationist in the Serengeti for 31 years, and I have been asked to represent my species in this trial." More laughter from the gallery. Skrethval snorted dismissively. Already feeling cheated of a worthy opponent? Already planning to make this hunt last a little longer than necessary just to salvage some entertainment value from what was clearly going to be a disappointing blood-claiming, a conservationist. Vethsar repeated, tasting the unfamiliar word. "You protect animals on your world." "I study them," Marcus replied. "I track them, and I watch them, and I learn how they live and hunt and die. And I have done this work in one of the most dangerous regions my planet has to offer. And you think this qualifies you to survive against the greatest hunter the Kethrani have ever produced?" Marcus turned to look at Krethvalum, really look at him, his eyes moving over the champion's body with an assessing gaze that Krethvalum found strangely unsettling, as if he were being catalogued and categorized and filed away for future reference. "I think," Marcus said slowly, "that your champion has never hunted anything quite like me." The horn sounded to begin. The blood-claiming Krethval exploded into motion, covering the distance to where Marcus had been standing in less than 2 seconds. His claws slashing through empty air, the human was already gone, having slipped into the maze of razor-edged foliage with a silence that should have been impossible for such a clumsy-looking creature. Krethval paused, his nostrils flaring as he tried to catch the human scent, his ears swiveling to detect any sound of movement for the first time in his long hunting career. He felt something that was not quite uncertainty, but was definitely not the confident anticipation he usually experienced at the start of a hunting. The viewing gallery. Warlord Vethsar leaned forward on his throne, his laughter fading as he watched the human disappear into the arena like a shadow dissolving into darkness. "Interesting," he murmured to himself, though he still had no doubt about the eventual outcome. After all, nothing survived the Arena of Thorns. Nothing had ever survived Krethval's hunt had begun. Krethvalum moved through the Arena of Thorns with the confidence of a predator who had never known failure, his powerful legs carrying him in long, loping strides as he tracked the human scent through the maze of deadly vegetation. The scent was strange, unlike anything he had hunted before, carrying notes of salt and something else he could not identify, something that made his instincts twitch in a way he did not understand. He had expected this hunt to be over within the first hour, as most of his hunts were, with the prey creature either frozen in terror or attempting some desperate last stand that would end with Krethval's claws buried in its chest instead. He found himself following a trail that seemed to go nowhere, looping back on itself, crossing over its own path in ways that made no logical sense. The human was not running blindly as prey should run, was not making the mistakes that fear and panic always caused in hunted creatures. The tracks he found were deliberate, placed with care, and several times Krethvalum realized he had been following a false trail only when the scent suddenly disappeared at a rock face or a stream crossing. This was not the behavior of prey. This was something else entirely in another part of the arena. Marcus Chun crouched beside a small stream, his fingers testing the water temperature, his eyes scanning the banks for any signs of what creatures might live in or near this water source. Had spent the first 2 hours of the hunt simply moving, putting distance between himself and the Kethrani champion while simultaneously learning the layout of the arena, mapping the terrain in his mind, identifying resources and hazards and potential shelter locations. 31 years in the Serengeti had taught him many things, but the most important lesson was simple. Knowledge was survival. A man who knew his environment could survive almost anything, while a man who did not know his environment would die even with every advantage in his favor. The arena was alien, filled with plants and creatures he had never seen before. But Marcus had spent his entire career studying unfamiliar ecosystems, and certain principles remained constant across all environments. Water was always essential. So he had located 3 water sources within the first hour and was now testing which ones were safe to drink. Food was necessary for extended survival, and he had already identified several fungal growths that matched patterns he recognized from Earth, patterns that usually indicated non-toxicity, though he would test them carefully before consuming any significant quantity. Shelter was crucial for rest and recovery, and he had found a small cave system that would provide protection from both the elements and from direct assault, with multiple exit routes that would prevent him from being trapped. The Kethrani had built this arena to favor their champion, but they had built it based on their understanding of prey behavior. And humans were not prey. Humans had never been prey, even when their ancestors had shared the African savanna with lions and leopards and hyenas. Humans had not been prey in the way other animals were prey. They had been something far more dangerous. They had been competitors. Marcus allowed himself a small smile as he heard Krethval's frustrated roar echo across the arena, the sound of a predator who was not finding what he expected to find. He remembered his first year in the Serengeti, when he had tracked the pride of lions for 3 weeks straight, sleeping in short cycles, moving when they moved, resting when they rested, learning their patterns and behaviors and social dynamics. The lions had known he was there, had watched him with golden eyes that promised violence. But they had never attacked him. They had recognized something in him, some quality that told their predator instincts that this particular creature was not worth the effort, not worth the risk, not worth the potential cost of trying to kill something that simply refused to behave like Krethvalum would learn the same lesson, though Marcus suspected it would take him longer than it had taken those lions. The first sun began to set over the arena, casting long shadows through the razor-edged plants, and Krethval's frustration grew with each passing hour. He had found the human's trail a dozen times, had followed it with all his considerable skill, and each time the trail had led to nothing, to dead ends and false paths and streams that carried no scent. His prey was not acting like prey. The human should have been hiding somewhere, trembling with fear, making the small sounds that frightened creatures always made, the sounds that would lead Krethvalum directly to him instead. There was only silence, silence, and patience, and the growing sense that he was not the only hunter in this arena. The thought was absurd. Of course, because the human had no claws, no fangs, no natural weapons of any kind. And yet Krethvalum could not shake the feeling that he was being watched, being studied, being assessed in ways that no prey creature had ever assessed him before. He pushed the feeling aside and continued his search, his pride refusing to accept that this soft, slow, fragile creature could possibly evade him for long. The second sun set, and still Crethvalum had not found his prey in the viewing gallery. The betting pools had begun to shift, with more and more wagers moving toward longer survival times. And Warlord Vethsar watched the arena monitors with an expression that had changed from amusement to something more complex. "He is not hiding," the Warlord observed to one of his advisors. "Look at the tracking data. He's moving constantly. But he is moving with purpose, always staying ahead of Crethvalum, always knowing where the champion is. How can he know?" The advisor asked. "He has no technology, no sensors. No way to track Crethval's position." "I do not know," Vethsar admitted. "But I intend to find out." Marcus spent the night in his cave, sleeping in 2-hour cycles, as his body had learned to do during decades of fieldwork in dangerous territory, his subconscious remaining alert for any sounds that might indicate approaching danger. He woke 3 times during the night, each time listening carefully to the sounds of the arena. And twice he heard Crethvalum pass within 100 meters of his position, the champion's heavy footsteps and frustrated breathing clearly audible in the night silence. Both times, Marcus remained perfectly still, perfectly silent, his heartbeat slow and steady, his breathing controlled to the point of near invisibility. Kethrani champion was searching in patterns now, trying to cover the arena systematically, but his patterns were predictable to anyone who understood predator behavior. And Marcus understood predator behavior better than almost anyone alive by morning. Crethvalum had not slept at all, his predator instincts refusing to let him rest while prey was still somewhere in his territory, somewhere in the darkness, somewhere watching him with eyes that should have been filled with fear, but were instead filled with something that looked disturbingly like patience. Marcus ate a small breakfast of the fungal growths he had tested the day before, drank deeply from the stream he'd identified as safe, and then began to move again, not away from Crethval toward him, just close enough to be seen, just briefly enough to confirm that the hunt was still on, and then gone again before the champion could close the distance. The game had begun in earnest, and Marcus knew from long experience that in any contest of endurance, the one who remained calm would always outlast the one who grew frustrated. The first night had belonged to him. Second night would be more interesting. By the second rotation of the blood claiming, the arena had drawn an audience of over 200 million viewers across the Kethrani Dominion, which was unprecedented for a trial involving such a seemingly unremarkable species. They had tuned in expecting to watch slaughter, expecting to see the human torn apart within hours, expecting the usual entertainment that the blood-claiming always provided when a soft species sent an inadequate champion to face Kethrani justice instead. They watched something that none of them had ever seen before. They watched the human study the champion from hidden positions throughout the arena. Marcus observed Crethval's movement patterns with the same careful attention he had given to every predator he had ever tracked, noting the way the champion favored his right side when climbing, the way his breathing changed when he caught a fresh scent, the way his 4 eyes moved in a specific sequence when scanning for threats. He watched Crethvalum return to the same high ground 3 times during the day, confirming what Marcus had suspected. The champion was territorial, instinct-driven, predictable in ways that a truly intelligent hunter should never be predictable. He noted that Crethvalum drank from the same stream at roughly the same times each day, that his rest periods followed a pattern even though the champion probably did not realize he was resting at all, that his charges were becoming shorter and less focused as exhaustion began to erode his reflexes. Every observation went into the mental catalog that Marcus had been building since childhood, the same catalog that held information about lion hunting behavior and elephant migration patterns in hyena, social dynamics, and 1,000 other details that most people would consider useless, but that had kept Marcus alive through 3 decades of working alongside the deadliest animals on Earth in the viewing gallery. Warlord Vethsar had summoned Dr. Yeel, a xenobiologist from the consortium, who had spent 20 years studying newly contacted species and was considered one of the foremost experts on the behavioral patterns of different sentient races. "Tell me about humans," Vethsar commanded, his eyes never leaving the arena monitors. "Tell me what I am seeing down there." Dr. Yeel, a small creature covered in iridescent scales that shifted color with her emotional state, took a moment to gather her thoughts before responding. "The human is not behaving like prey," she said carefully, "because humans have never been prey, Warlord. Not in the way your species understands the concept. All soft species are prey," Vethsar replied. "It is the natural order. With respect, Warlord. I have been researching their homeworld since first contact was announced, and what I have found is deeply troubling from a predator's perspective." She activated a holographic display showing Earth's evolutionary history, highlighting the emergence of early hominids on the African savanna. Humans evolved as what they call persistence predators, Dr. Yeel explained. Their ancestors did not have claws or fangs or venom or any of the weapons that most predators rely upon. But they had something far more dangerous: endurance. Endurance is not a weapon. On Earth, it was the ultimate weapon, Warlord. And you must understand that their planet's environment favored different survival strategies than your own world did. Dr. Yeel brought up images of early human hunters, small and seemingly fragile compared to the massive creatures that surrounded them. Their ancestors would select the prey animal and then follow it. Not chasing, not sprinting, just following at a steady pace that they could maintain for hours, for days if necessary, and the prey would run and escape easily at first. But then the humans would appear again, still following, still patient, still coming. The prey would run again, and again, and each time it would escape. But each time it would be a little more tired, a little more stressed, a little closer to the point of collapse, and the humans would never stop following. Eventually, the prey animal would simply fall down, its heart giving out, its body unable to continue, and the humans would walk up to it calmly and kill it without any struggle at all. Vethsar was silent for a long moment. "Processing this information, you were saying they hunted by simply refusing to stop." "Yes, Warlord, and they hunted creatures that were faster, stronger, more dangerous than themselves, creatures that could have killed them with a single blow. But that did not matter because the humans were patient, and the other animals were not. Their bodies are designed for efficiency over speed. They can regulate their temperature through sweating in ways that most species cannot. They can maintain a steady pace almost indefinitely, and most importantly, they understand patience in a way that explosive predators like the Kathrani do not." She gestured to the arena monitors, where Marcus had just appeared at the edge of Krethvol's field of vision, standing perfectly still, watching the champion with calm, steady eyes. "Look at what he is doing, Warlord. He is not hiding anymore. He is showing himself deliberately, staying just out of reach, making Krethvol chase him again and again, knowing that each chase costs the champion energy that cannot be easily replaced." Krethvolum charged toward the human's position with a roar of frustration, his powerful legs driving him forward at speeds that should have been impossible to evade. But when he arrived, the human was gone, having slipped away through a gap in the vegetation that was too small for Krethvolum to follow. And the champion's roar of anger echoed across the arena as he realized he had been led on another fruitless chase. 40 hours. Dr. Yeel said quietly, "Your champion has not slept in 40 hours, Warlord. While the human has been sleeping in short cycles and eating regularly, and maintaining his energy reserves. The hunt is not being conducted by Krethvalum anymore. It is being conducted by the human, and your champion does not even realize it. In the arena, Marcus allowed himself to be seen again, just briefly, just long enough to ensure that Krethvalum would follow. And then he disappeared into the maze of razor-edged plants. He was not running anymore. He was herding. Every appearance was calculated to draw Krethvalum in a specific direction, away from the water sources that Marcus had claimed as his own, away from the cave where he had been sleeping, away from every resource that would allow the champion to recover his strength. The Catherine had built this arena as a hunting ground, a place where their champion would always have the advantage. But they had built it without understanding what they were dealing with. They had built it for prey, and Marcus Chen was not prey, he was a persistence predator, the most successful type of hunter Earth had ever produced. And he was doing what his ancestors had done for 2 million years. He was following, he was watching, he was waiting in Krethvalum, for all his strength and speed and deadly natural weapons, was beginning to understand that he had never faced anything like this before. The champion's charges were growing shorter now, his recovery times longer, his movements less precise, as exhaustion began to erode the reflexes that had made him the deadliest hunter in the Dominion. He had not eaten since the hunt began, because his pride would not allow him to pause the chase, had not slept because his instincts screamed the prey was nearby and must be caught, had not rested because rest was for the weak, and he was Krethvalum, undefeated champion of the blood claiming. By the end of the second rotation, Krethvalum was operating on nothing but pride and fury, his body running on reserves that were rapidly depleting, his mind clouded by exhaustion and frustration and the growing terrible suspicion that something had gone very wrong with this hunt. And in the viewing gallery, Warlord Vethsar watched his champion stumble for the first time in over 200 hunts. And he began to understand what Dr. Yeel had been trying to tell him. The human was not trying to escape. The human was not trying to hide. The human was hunting the hunter, and he was winning. The third rotation began with Krethval standing motionless in the center of a small clearing, his chest heaving with exhausted breaths, his 4 eyes bloodshot and unfocused, his once gleaming hide now dull with stress and dehydration. He had not slept in over 60 hours. He had not eaten in nearly as long. His body was burning through its reserves at an alarming rate. And somewhere in the back of his exhausted mind, he knew that he was in trouble, that this hunt had gone wrong in ways he did not understand, that the prey creature he had been so confident about killing was somehow still out there, still watching, still waiting. The human appeared at the edge of the clearing, making no attempt to hide, simply standing there with his hands at his sides and his eyes fixed on Krethval with that same calm, patient expression that had become so infuriating over the past 3 days. "You look tired," Marcus said, his voice carrying clearly across the distance between them. Krethval's response was a snarl that lacked the power and menace it should have carried, a sound that came from a throat raw from roaring and a body running on nothing but stubborn refusal to accept defeat. "I will tear you apart," the champion managed, though even he could hear how hollow the threat sounded. "You have been saying that for 3 days," Marcus observed. "And yet here I am, still in one piece, while you can barely stand." The human took a single step forward, and Krethvalum flinched. It was a small movement, barely noticeable, but Marcus saw it and understood its significance immediately. The predator was beginning to fear the prey. This was the moment that Marcus had been working toward since the hunt began, the moment when the psychological balance shifted, when the ancient dynamic of hunter and hunted began to reverse itself. He had seen this moment before, had watched it happen with lions who had chased the same prey too long, had observed it in hyenas who had expended too much energy on a hunt that should have been easy, had documented it in a dozen different species across his long career. Predators were not designed for extended hunts. They were designed for explosive violence, for short bursts of overwhelming power that ended with prey dead and predator fed. And when that pattern was disrupted, when the prey refused to die or flee or fight, the predator's instincts began to fail him. Crethvalum charged. It was not the lightning-fast assault that had terrified so many previous champions, not the unstoppable rush of predatory violence that had ended over 200 lives in this arena. It was desperate, clumsy, driven by rage rather than instinct, by pride rather than calculation. Marcus watched the champion come, reading the angle of attack, noting the way Crethval favored his left side, identifying the exact moment when the charge became committed and could not be adjusted. And then he moved, not fast by Kethrani standards, not even particularly fast by human standards, but precisely, economically, with the efficiency of motion that came from decades of working around dangerous animals. He sidestepped at exactly the right moment, using Crethval's own momentum against him, and the champion's claws struck the rock face behind where Marcus had been standing with a sound like breaking thunder. Two of Crethval's talons shattered on impact, and his scream of pain echoed across the arena, a sound that no one in the viewing gallery had ever heard from a Kethrani champion, a sound that spoke of something far worse than physical injury. Marcus stepped back, still calm, still patient, watching the champion cradle his ruined hand against his chest. "What are you?" Crethvalum demanded, his voice cracked and broken. "What kind of creature are you?" Marcus considered the question for a moment before answering, "On my world. There is an old law," he said, his voice quiet but steady. "It is older than my species, older than thought itself, older than any of the civilizations that have risen and fallen on Earth. This law says that the hunt does not belong to the fastest or the strongest. That victory is not determined by who has the sharpest claws or the most powerful muscles. The hunt belongs to the one who can still stand when the other falls." He crouched down, bringing himself closer to eye level with the kneeling champion, meeting Crethval's 4 bloodshot eyes with his own calm gaze. "Your ancestors evolved to kill quickly, to overwhelm prey with explosive violence and then move on to the next hunt. And this made them successful predators on your world, where prey was abundant and competition was fierce. But my ancestors evolved differently. They evolved on a world where the prey was often faster and stronger than they were, where a single hunt might last for days, where patience and endurance were more valuable than speed and strength. We learned to follow, to watch, to wait, to simply refuse to stop until our prey could not continue. And this strategy made us the most successful hunters our planet has ever produced. Your species has never faced anything like us. Crethvalum, you do not know how to fight something that simply refuses to stop, that treats exhaustion as a weapon, that wins not by being faster or stronger, but by being more patient." Crethvalum lunged again, a desperate last attempt to salvage his pride, to end this nightmare hunt with the blood that should have been spilled 3 days ago. His body failed him mid-stride. A champion collapsed to the arena floor, his muscles finally surrendering to the exhaustion that had been building since the first hour of the hunt. His consciousness fading as his overtaxed systems began to shut down. He was not dead, merely broken, pushed beyond the limits that his predator physiology could sustain, defeated not by violence but by the simple, implacable patience of a creature that should have been prey. Marcus stood over the fallen champion, unharmed, untouched, as the sun began to set on the final rotation of the blood claiming in the viewing gallery. Absolute silence had fallen over the crowd of millions. They had watched their greatest champion, the most decorated hunter in the history of the blood claiming, collapse at the feet of a creature half his size, a creature with no claws or fangs or natural weapons of any kind, a creature that had not struck a single violent blow during the entire 3-day Trial Warlord Vethsar sat frozen on his throne of bones, his mind struggling to process what he had just witnessed. His understanding of predator and prey shifting in ways that would take years to fully comprehend. Ariel stood beside him, her scales cycling through colors that indicated deep disturbance and fascination in equal measure. 63 hours, she said quietly. That is how long a trained human can maintain pursuit without sleep or extended rest, Warlord. They have documented cases of individuals traveling over 200 kilometers in a single hunt without stopping. Your champion never had a chance. Not because he was weak, but because he was facing something his evolution never prepared him for on the arena floor. Marcus looked up at the viewing gallery, meeting Warlord Vethsar's eyes across the vast distance. He did not smile. He did not celebrate. He simply waited, because patience was what humans did best. And the final lesson was yet to come. The arena fell silent in a way that no blood claiming had ever ended before. Without the screams of dying prey, without the triumphant roars of a victorious champion, without the celebration that always followed Kethrani dominance over another soft species. Instead, there was only the sound of Krethful's labored breathing as medical teams rushed onto the arena floor to tend to the fallen champion, and the quiet footsteps of Marcus Chen as he walked toward the exit with the same calm, measured pace he had maintained throughout the entire 3-day trial across the Dominion. 200 million viewers sat in stunned silence, their understanding of the universe fundamentally altered by what they had just witnessed. They had believed themselves to be the ultimate predators, the apex of evolutionary design, the rightful rulers of any species they encountered. They had just watched that belief crumble beneath the feet of a creature who had not thrown a single punch. Warlord Vethsar descended from his viewing platform into the arena, something no warlord had done during a blood claiming in over 1,000 years. Protocol demanded that he execute the failed champion, that he make an example of Krethful's weakness to ensure that future hunters would not repeat his mistakes. But Vethsar found himself walking past the medical teams and the fallen champion, his feet carrying him toward the human who had done the impossible. Marcus stopped and turned to face the approaching warlord, showing no fear despite the fact that Vethsar was larger than Krethfulum and far more dangerous. A leader who had earned his position through countless victories in combat. You could have killed him, Vethsar said, his voice carrying the weight of 3,000 years of Kethrani tradition. At the end, when he fell, you had the right to claim his life. It is permitted under the rules of the blood claiming. I could have, Marcus agreed, his tone conversational, almost friendly. Why did you not? Because killing him was never the point. Marcus gestured to the viewing galleries, to the millions of faces staring down at them through holographic displays, to the cameras that were broadcasting this moment across the entire Dominion. You wanted humanity's blood. You wanted us to prove ourselves through violence, through killing, through playing the game by your rules. But we do not play by those rules. Warlord, we have never played by those rules. We survived our world not by being the deadliest creatures on it, but by being the most adaptable, the most patient, the most willing to do whatever was necessary to simply keep going. Your blood claiming was designed to test whether a species could survive against your greatest hunter. And I have demonstrated that we can. But more importantly, I have demonstrated how we do it. He met the warlord's eyes without flinching, without looking away, without showing any of the submission that prey was supposed to show when confronted by a predator. We do not fight fair. Warlord, we never have. We win by refusing to accept the rules that our enemies try to impose on us, by finding the weaknesses that nobody expects us to find, by treating every challenge as a puzzle to be solved rather than a battle to be won. Your champion is the greatest hunter your species has ever produced. And I beat him without weapons, without combat training, without any of the things that should have been necessary to survive in that arena. Imagine what we could do if we actually wanted to hurt you." The words hung in the air between them. Not a threat exactly, but something far more unsettling. A simple statement of fact delivered without emotion or aggression. Vethazar is silent for a long moment, his predator's mind racing through implications and possibilities that he had never considered before. Had spent his entire life believing that the Kethrani were the apex, that nothing in the galaxy could threaten their dominance, that the blood claiming was a formality that would always end the same way. He understood now that he had been wrong. The human was still watching him with those calm, patient eyes, waiting for a response, waiting with the same infinite patience that had broken Krethvalum. "What do you want?" Vethzar finally asked. "I want you to understand what you are dealing with," Marcus replied. "Humanity is coming into galactic society, whether you like it or not. And you have a choice to make about how you want to relate to us. You can have us as allies, as partners, as friends who will stand beside you against common threats and work together toward mutual benefit. Or you can have us as enemies. And I promise you, Warlord, you do not want us as enemies." He turned and gestured toward the viewing galleries again. "We are the species that crossed oceans on logs because we wanted to see what was on the other side. We walked out of Africa and covered an entire planet in less than 100,000 years. We went to our moon because we were curious about it. And now we are reaching toward the stars. We do not stop. Warlord, we do not give up. We do not accept defeat. We simply find another way forward and keep moving until we get where we want to go. Your ancestors became apex predators through explosive violence, through overwhelming force applied in short bursts. And this strategy served them well on your world. But our ancestors became something else entirely. Something that your evolution never prepared you to face. We became the species that treats the universe itself as something to be outlasted." Marcus began walking toward the arena exit again, pausing at the threshold to look back at the Warlord one final time. "The Kethrani Dominion can have humanity as an ally. Or you can spend the next 1,000 years learning what our ancestors taught every apex predator on Earth." He smiled. And for the first time, Vethzar saw something behind the human's calm exterior. Something ancient and implacable and utterly without mercy. Something that did not hate or fear or rage, but simply continued, endlessly, inevitably, until everything that opposed it had fallen away. "We are still here, Warlord. Lions and tigers and bears and wolves and every other predator that once hunted us. Most of them are gone now, reduced to small populations that exist only because we allow them to exist. Because we choose to protect them from the extinction that would otherwise claim them. We outlasted them all. Not through violence, not through being faster or stronger or more deadly, but simply by refusing to stop. Consider carefully which side of that equation you want to be on." Marcus Chen walked out of the Arena of Thorns, leaving behind a dominion that would never be quite the same in the weeks that followed. The recording of the blood claiming spread across the galaxy, watched by billions of sentient beings who had heard stories of Kethrani brutality and had assumed that humanity would become just another conquered species. Instead, they watched a 53-year-old conservationist defeat the greatest hunter in the galaxy without throwing a punch, using nothing but patience and knowledge and the ancient evolutionary inheritance of a species that had learned long ago that persistence was the ultimate weapon. The Kethrani mathematicians ran their calculations, modeling potential conflicts, projecting outcomes, trying to determine what would happen if the Dominion went to war with this new species. None of the results were favorable. A species that could maintain pursuit indefinitely, that could adapt to any environment, that treated exhaustion as a strategy rather than a weakness, that simply refused to accept defeat under any circumstances. Such a species could not be conquered through traditional means. They would not break. They would not surrender. They would simply keep coming, keep adapting, keep finding new ways to fight, until the Kethrani themselves were exhausted and broken warlord Vethsar considered all of this as he sat alone in his chambers, looking at the bones that decorated his throne. Bones that had once seemed like trophies of inevitable victory. They looked different. Now they looked like warnings in the end. The Dominion chose alliance, chose partnership, chose to stand beside humanity rather than against it. It was, the ward reflected, the first time in 3,000 years that the blood-claiming had taught the Kethrani something about themselves rather than about their prey, and somewhere on a ship heading back to Earth. Marcus Chun sat by a window watching the stars go by, already thinking about the next challenge, the next problem to be solved, the next obstacle to be outlasted, because that was what humans did. They kept going, and they never, ever stopped.